My husband mocked me in front of his friends, saying I was just a wife. 10 minutes later, his business collapsed because he didn't know I owned his biggest client. Just a wife. My husband's laughter bounced off the mahogany walls of the private dining room. Gentlemen, my Sarah here is the perfect example of knowing your place. She's mastered the art of being just a wife. Richard raised his whiskey glass, eyes gleaming with mockery as his business associates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Hey beautiful people. Your support means everything to me. Help me reach my next big milestone by hitting that subscribe button. It's free, supports the channel, and ensures you never miss an amazing video. Let's dive in. I maintained my practiced smile, the one I'd perfected over 7 years of marriage, smoothing the napkin in my lap as if it were the most important task in the world. Around us, the private dining room at Le Cardinal buzzed with nervous energy. The city's business elite surrounded our table, CEOs, venture capitalists, and most crucially the entire board of Meridian Corp, Richard's biggest prospective client. If only he knew they were actually mine. Tell them, darling, Richard continued, the ice cubes in his fourth whiskey clinking against the crystal. Tell them about that time you thought about getting an MBA. He turned to James Wilson, Meridian CEO, who I'd had lunch with just yesterday. Can you imagine? I had to explain to her that the business world isn't for everyone. Some people are just meant to support from the sidelines. I caught Thomas Chen's eye across the arrangement of white orchids. As Meridian's senior partner, he'd been instrumental in our last merger. His slight frown was nearly imperceptible, but I recognized it. The same expression he wore when we negotiated particularly challenging deals. Not that my husband knew anything about those meetings. Richard, Thomas interrupted smoothly, I'm actually quite interested in Sarah's perspective on. Oh, Tom. Richard waved his hand dismissively. Sarah's perspective is best saved for choosing dinner party menus and managing our social calendar. Right, honey? His fingers dug into my shoulder with what others might mistake for affection, but I felt the possessive pressure behind it. The waiter appeared with another round of drinks, and I watched as he placed a fresh whiskey in front of my husband. Richard's hand trembled slightly as he reached for it. A tell I'd learned to recognize years ago. 7 years of marriage had taught me to read the signs of his impending social spiral. You know what makes a successful man? Richard's voice grew louder, words slightly slurred. Having a wife who knows her role. Sarah here, she's perfected it. No ambitions beyond our home, no silly career dreams competing with mine. Just a wife, and that's exactly what I need. I observed the uncomfortable glances around the table, mentally cataloging each reaction. 3 blackberries being checked under the tablecloth, 2 loosened ties, and 1 executive signaling discreetly for the check. After orchestrating hundreds of business dinners myself, I could spot a failing one from miles away. Mr. Montgomery, Patricia Reynolds, Meridian's CFO, spoke up. Perhaps we should discuss the projected quarterly. The projections can wait, Patricia. Richard's voice boomed. I'm teaching these gentlemen a valuable lesson about success. Behind every great man is a woman who knows she's just a wife. Isn't that right, Sarah? The silence that followed felt like a physical weight. I could feel every gaze in the room, some pitying, others knowing. With deliberate precision, I lifted my water glass, took a careful sip and placed it back on the table. Each movement measured, controlled, just like my response to his latest display of condescension. Actually, Richard, I began, using the same quiet authority that commanded my own boardroom, I'd love to hear more about those projections. His laugh cut through the air like a knife. See what I mean? Adorable, isn't she? Trying to participate in business talk. He turned to the table conspiratorially. Next thing you know, she'll be asking about market volatility and hedge fund strategies. My phone buzzed silently in my lap. Another update about tomorrow's board meeting, no doubt. I watched Thomas check his phone too, his expression carefully neutral. We'd spent months planning this, and Richard's behavior tonight was making it almost too easy. A toast. Richard suddenly declared, raising his glass unsteadily. To the perfect wife, one who knows her place and keeps to it. He turned to me with what he probably thought was an indulgent smile. No offense, darling, but some of us are just meant for bigger things. The business world requires a certain gravitas that you can't learn from hosting dinner parties. I raised my glass along with the others, my smile never wavering. If Richard had been more observant, he might have noticed it didn't reach my eyes. If he'd been less focused on himself, he might have caught the knowing looks exchanged between me and several Meridian executives. If he'd been sober enough, he might have realized that his biggest clients' board members were paying more attention to his wife's reactions than his words. In 12 hours, everything would change. But for now, I was content to play my part, to be just a wife for one last evening. After all, I hadn't spent years building one of the city's most successful investment firms by being impatient. Sometimes the sweetest victories are the ones you have to wait for. As I excused myself from the table, Richard's voice followed me down the hallway, still regaling his audience with stories of his business prowess. My wife wouldn't understand the complexities of what we do, he boasted. She's better suited for planning our next dinner party. In the powder room's elegant solitude, I checked my phone again. 3 urgent messages from my executive team and a brief text from Thomas Chin. Everything is in place for tomorrow. Board approval confirmed. I studied my reflection in the ornate mirror, remembering the exact moment 7 years ago when I decided to keep my professional identity separate from my marriage. But tonight was different. Tonight, the carefully constructed wall between Sarah Montgomery, devoted wife, and Sarah Chin Martinez, CEO of Martinez Investment Partners, was about to crumble. As I reapplied my lipstick, my hand steady despite the anger simmering beneath my composed exterior, I could still hear Richard's words echoing in my head. Just a wife? Returning to the dining room, I found Richard in rare form. The whiskey had loosened his tongue further, and he was now fully committed to his impromptu lecture on gender roles in business. You see, gentlemen, he gestured broadly with his glass, nearly spilling its contents. Women like my Sarah here. They don't have the killer instinct needed for big business. Right, darling? He winked at me as I took my seat. Tell them about that time you tried to understand our company's quarterly reports. I felt Thomas Chin tense beside me, but I placed a subtle hand on his arm. Not yet. The timing had to be perfect. Oh, Richard, I smiled, playing my part one last time. You know those numbers just confuse me. Exactly. Richard practically shouted, pointing at me with his glass. Leave the business to those who understand it. My wife here, she's happiest planning galas and charity events. Isn't that right, sweetheart? Patricia Reynolds, Meridian's CFO, cleared her throat. Actually, Mr. Montgomery, I'd be very interested in hearing Mrs. Montgomery's thoughts on. Patricia, Richard interrupted, his condescension thick enough to cut with a knife. Let's not put Sarah on the spot. She's just a wife, and a perfect one at that. Knows her place, doesn't try to meddle in things beyond her understanding. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. I could see James Wilson, Meridian's CEO, checking his watch for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. Several other executives were exchanging meaningful glances, and Thomas Chin was typing something on his phone beneath the table. In fact, Richard continued, oblivious to the tension in the room, I'll tell you a funny story. Last month, Sarah asked me about our company's merger strategy. Can you believe it? He laughed heartily, encouraging others to join in. A few weak chuckles followed. I told her to stick to planning our anniversary party instead. That's more her speed. I felt my phone vibrate again. Without looking, I knew it would be confirmation from my legal team. Everything was prepared for tomorrow morning's announcement. Richard's words tonight were just making the timing more poetic. You know what they say. Richard raised his glass again. Behind every successful man is a woman who knows her limitations. My Sarah here? She's accepted hers beautifully. No aspirations to be anything more than what she is, just a wife. The crystal glasses clinked half-heartedly as the table responded to his toast. I noticed Patricia Reynolds' knuckles were white around her glass stem, and James Wilson was now openly frowning. Richard dear, I spoke up, my voice carrying that quiet authority I usually reserved for board meetings. Perhaps we should discuss something else? He patted my hand condescendingly. See what I mean? Always looking out for my best interests. That's what a good wife does. Knows when to speak up and when to stay quiet. Unlike some women who think they can run companies. He laughed again, louder this time. Can you imagine? Sarah running a business? If he hadn't been so focused on his own voice, he might have noticed the slight smirks on the faces of the Meridian executives. If he hadn't been 3 sheets to the wind, he might have caught the knowing look that passed between Thomas Chin and me. But Richard had always been blind to anything that didn't fit his worldview. I mean really, he continued, warming to his theme, What does a wife know about market strategies? About client relationships? About running a multi-million-dollar operation? He turned to James Wilson. That's why I'm the perfect partner for Meridian, James. I understand the business world. I know how to handle big accounts. Unlike my lovely wife here who thinks balancing a checkbook is high finance. The insults continued to flow as freely as the whiskey, each one another nail in the coffin of Richard's business empire. By the time dessert arrived, he had thoroughly dismissed my intelligence, my capabilities, and my potential, all while trying to impress the very people who actually reported to me. As I declined the creme brulee, pleading a slight headache, I caught Thomas Chen's eye. A barely perceptible nod passed between us. In less than 12 hours, Richard would learn exactly what just a wife was capable of. But for now, I sat quietly, playing my role one last time as my husband continued to mock the very thing he should have feared most, my capabilities. The evening was winding down, and with it Richard's reign as a respected businessman. He just didn't know it yet. As the valet brought our car around, Richard was still riding high on his performance at dinner, completely oblivious to the storm brewing. I watched him hand over a generous tip, his movements loose from the whiskey, still chuckling about his clever observations regarding wives and their proper place in the world. That went perfectly, he slurred, sliding into the passenger seat. For once I was grateful for his drinking. It gave me a legitimate reason to drive and, more importantly, to stop by my office on the way home. Just need to pick up something I left at my charity office, I said casually as I turned down Madison Avenue. Richard merely grunted, his head already lolling against the window. He'd never once visited my charity office in the 7 years since I told him I was doing volunteer work. The truth was far more interesting. The gleaming 50-story building housed Martinez Investment Partners, though Richard had never made the connection between the company name and my mother's maiden name. I pulled into the private underground garage, parking in my reserved spot marked CO. Richard was already softly snoring. "I'll just be a minute, dear," I whispered, though he was far too gone to hear me. The elevator recognized my fingerprint, shooting straight up to the executive floor. At 11:30 p.m. the office was quiet but not empty. Thomas Chen was waiting in my office, along with Patricia Reynolds and James Wilson from Meridian. The wall of windows behind my desk offered a spectacular view of the city lights. But tonight, none of us were interested in the scenery. "That was quite a performance your husband put on," Patricia said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "I don't know how you've managed to keep this secret for so long, Sarah." I settled behind my desk, the familiar leather chair grounding me. Richard sees what he expects to see. And he expects to see just a wife. The words tasted bitter on my tongue. James slid a folder across my desk. "The final paperwork is ready. Once you sign these, Meridian Corp will officially terminate all contracts with Montgomery Industries and transfer exclusively to Martinez Partners. Are you sure you want to do this?" Thomas asked quietly. "It will effectively bankrupt his company." I opened the folder, uncapping my Mont Blanc pen, a gift I'd given myself after my first billion-dollar deal. Richard built his company on 3 major pillars: Meridian's contracts, Wilson Financial's investments, and the Chin Group's partnerships. I looked up at my colleagues, my friends who'd kept my secret all these years. And as of tomorrow morning, all 3 will be exclusively contracted with Martinez Partners. "He never once suspected?" Patricia asked, shaking her head in disbelief. "Even though you've been outperforming his company for the past 5 years? I signed the final document with a flourish. Richard's ego wouldn't allow him to see it. "Do you know he actually laughed when he heard rumors that Martinez Partners was run by a woman? Said it had to be fake news because women don't have the killer instinct for big business." "Well, he's about to learn otherwise," James said, gathering the signed papers. "The press release is scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow. Your husband's company will lose 70% of its business value within the first hour of trading." I stood, smoothing my dress. "Have our PR team ready. Once this breaks, there will be questions about why I kept my identity hidden. We need to control the narrative." "And Richard?" Thomas asked. "What will you tell him?" A sad smile crossed my face. The truth. That while he was busy telling everyone I was just a wife, I was busy building an empire that just acquired his biggest clients. I checked my phone. A text from my driver confirming Richard was still sound asleep in the car. "It's ironic," Patricia mused, gathering her things. If he had ever bothered to attend one of your charity events, he might have noticed they were actually business networking functions. If he'd ever asked about your volunteer work. But he didn't, I finished. Because in his mind I was just a wife. And tomorrow he'll learn exactly what that wife is capable of. We rode down in the elevator together, these powerful executives who had become my closest allies. They had seen past the facade I presented at Richard's dinners, recognized the business acumen I wielded quietly but effectively. Your car is ready, Ms. Martinez, my security guard said as we reached the garage. The others walked to their own vehicles while I returned to where Richard slept, blissfully unaware that in less than 10 hours, his carefully constructed world would collapse. As I drove us home through the quiet city streets, I thought about the moment 7 years ago when I'd chosen to keep my professional life separate from my marriage. It had seemed easier then, simpler to let Richard believe what he wanted about his wife's capabilities. But tonight's dinner had confirmed what I'd known for months. The time for hiding was over. Had a great night, Richard mumbled as I helped him into bed. Showed everyone, what a perfect wife you are. I watched him fall back asleep, already dreading tomorrow's hangover. Yes, dear, I whispered. Tomorrow you'll see exactly what kind of wife you have. I woke before sunrise, leaving Richard still snoring off his whiskey haze. By 7 a.m. I was back in my office at Martinez Partners, watching the early morning light paint the city skyline in shades of gold. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since I'd arrived. Everyone wanted confirmation that we were moving forward with what the media would soon dub the Martinez maneuver. The press release is ready, my PR director Lisa announced as she entered my office. We've got exclusive interviews lined up with CNBC, Bloomberg, and the Wall Street Journal. They're particularly interested in the human angle. The CEO who hid in plain sight. I skimmed the press release on my tablet, making a few minor adjustments. Make sure they understand this isn't about revenge. It's about business. Meridian Corp, Wilson Financial, and the Chin Group are making a strategic decision to partner with the firm that's shown the best performance over the past 5 years. Even if that decision bankrupts your husband? Lisa raised an eyebrow. Especially then. I checked my watch, 7:30 a.m. Has Richard's assistant arrived at his office yet? Lisa nodded, a slight smirk playing at her lips. Jenny reports he just stumbled in looking worse for wear. She said he's already demanded 3 aspirin and keeps mumbling about last night's successful dinner. I pulled up the live feed from my trading floor on one of my office's wall screens. The energy was electric. Everyone knew what was coming. 7 years of secrecy were about to end, and with it Richard's illusions of superiority. Ms. Martinez, my assistant Michael appeared at the door. Thomas Chin is on line 1. He says Richard's been trying to reach him all morning. A small smile crossed my face as I picked up the phone. Thomas? Yes, everything's proceeding as planned. Is he getting nervous? He's left 6 messages already, Thomas replied, amusement evident in his voice. Apparently he's trying to schedule a follow-up meeting to close the deal from last night. Should I tell him I'm busy signing contracts with Martinez Partners? Let him sweat a little longer, I said, checking the time again, 8:15 a.m. The press release goes live in 45 minutes. Have your team ready to announce the transition of all Meridian accounts to Martinez Partners immediately after. I spent the next 30 minutes coordinating with our legal team, ensuring every detail was perfect. Richard's company would lose not just Meridian's business, but all associated subsidiaries and partner corporations. It would be a clean sweep. At 8:45, my phone lit up with Richard's face on the screen. I let it ring through to voicemail, imagining his hangover-induced frustration as he tried to figure out why none of his major clients were returning his calls. Ms. Martinez, Michael appeared again, everything is in place. The NYSE opening bell rings in 10 minutes. Our traders are ready to respond to the market volatility we're expecting when the news breaks. I stood straightening my blazer. Tell everyone I'll be on the trading floor for the announcement. They deserve to see this in person. The energy on the trading floor was palpable as I walked through. These people had kept my secret for years, had helped build Martinez Partners into a powerhouse while maintaining the fiction that we were just another investment firm. Today they would see their loyalty rewarded. At 8:57 my phone buzzed again, Richard. This time I answered. Darling. His voice was tense despite his attempt at casualness. Have you heard from Thomas Chin this morning? Or James Wilson. I can't seem to reach anyone from Meridian. I'm sure they're just busy, I replied smoothly, watching the seconds tick down on the trading floor's massive clock. Important executives, important meetings. But the contracts were supposed to be signed this morning. Richard's voice rose slightly. After last night's dinner, it should have been a formality. Sarah, are you sure you didn't say something to offend them? Sometimes you can be a bit. Well, I checked my watch, 8:59 a.m. Actually, Richard, I think they were very impressed by last night's dinner. Particularly your observations about wives and their proper place in business. What? Sarah, what are you talking about? This is serious business, not some dinner party planning. The opening bell rang, cutting him off. On every screen on the trading floor, the press release began to appear. I watched as Richard's company's stock ticker started to flash red. Turn on CNBC, I said quietly into the phone. What? Why would I? Just do it, Richard. I could hear the TV in the background of his office coming to life, followed by the anchor's voice. Breaking news in the financial sector as Martinez Partners, led by CEO Sarah Chin Martinez, announces the exclusive acquisition of contracts with Meridian Corp., Wilson Financial and the Chin Group, all formerly held by Montgomery Industries. The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. Sarah? Richard's voice was barely a whisper. What is this? I watched his company's stock price begin its free fall. This, Richard, is what happens when you underestimate someone for being just a wife. The trading floor erupted in controlled chaos around me as the market responded to the news. But I remained still, phone pressed to my ear, listening to my husband's world crumble in real time. I'll be home early today, I said finally. I think we need to talk about my career in finance. The trading floor continued to buzz with activity behind me as I made my way back to my office. My phone hadn't stopped vibrating since the announcement, a mix of congratulatory messages from industry leaders and increasingly desperate calls from Richard. Sarah. His voice cracked through the speaker when I finally answered. What the hell is happening? My stock. It's down 60%. Meridian just pulled all their contracts. Wilson Financial too. Even the Chin Group. They're all saying something about exclusive deals with Martinez Partners. This has to be a mistake. I settled into my chair, watching the numbers tumble across my screens. It's not a mistake, Richard. Though I understand your confusion. After all, what would just a wife know about hostile takeovers? What are you? His voice trailed off, and I could almost see the pieces clicking into place in his mind. Sarah Chin Martinez. Martinez, your mother's maiden name. You're the CEO everyone's been talking about. The very same. I kept my voice level, professional. The one you said couldn't possibly exist because women don't have the killer instinct for business. The sound of something shattering came through the phone. Probably the crystal whiskey tumbler he kept on his desk. How long? He demanded. How long have you been lying to me? Lying? I couldn't help but laugh. Richard, I've been running Martinez Partners for 7 years. I never lied. You just never asked. You were too busy telling everyone what I couldn't do to notice what I was actually doing. This is insane. His voice rose to a shout. You can't do this. I'm your husband. And I'm just a wife, remember? The words tasted like victory on my tongue. The kind who knows her place. Though it seems my place is at the head of a company that just acquired all your major clients. Through my office windows I could see the media vans arriving outside our building. The story was spreading faster than even our PR team had anticipated. My God, Richard's voice had dropped to a whisper. Last night, at dinner, all those things I said. About wives knowing their limitations. About women not understanding big business. I finished for him. Yes, that was quite entertaining. Especially with the Meridian board right there. Did you know Patricia Reynolds has been my mentor for the past 5 years? Another crash from his end of the line. Thomas Chin, he knew? This whole time. They all knew, Richard. Every executive at that table last night works with me regularly. Most of them report to me through various subsidiaries. I paused, letting that sink in. That's why they looked so uncomfortable when you were explaining my capabilities. Sarah, please. His voice had taken on a pleading tone I'd never heard before. We can fix this. Whatever I did wrong, however I made you feel, we can work it out. Just call off this takeover. I watched as another alert flashed across my screen. Montgomery Industries stock had dropped below the critical threshold. Emergency trading holds were being implemented. This isn't about feelings, Richard. It's business. Pure and simple. Martinez Partners made better offers, showed stronger performance, and demonstrated superior market understanding. The fact that it coincides with your public dismissal of my capabilities is just poetic timing. You've destroyed me, he whispered. Everything I built. No, Richard. You did that yourself. Every time you dismissed me, every time you mocked the idea of a woman in business, every time you declared I was just a wife, you were digging your own grave. I simply waited for you to finish digging. My assistant appeared at the door, signaling that the press was waiting in the conference room. I have to go, I told Richard. I have a press conference to attend. Unlike you, I still have a company to run. Wait. The desperation in his voice was palpable. What am I supposed to do now? I stood straightening my jacket. I suggest you start by asking your wife for business advice. Oh wait. I allowed myself a small smile. You don't believe in that, do you? As I ended the call, I could see Richard's face on every financial news channel. Photos from last night's dinner juxtaposed with shots of our company logos. The headlines were already running. Martinez Partners CEO reveals identity. Acquires husband's business in historic takeover. Ms. Martinez, my assistant, stepped in. The press is ready. And Mr. Montgomery is in the lobby demanding to see you. I gathered my tablet and straightened my shoulders. Let him up. It's time he saw exactly what Just a Wife has built while he wasn't paying attention. The elevator doors would open any minute, bringing my husband face to face with the empire I'd created in the shadows of his condescension. But first, I had a press conference to attend. After all, the business world was waiting to hear from the woman who'd hidden in plain sight, building one of the most successful investment firms in the city while being dismissed as just a wife. Let Richard wait in the lobby a little longer. He'd spent years teaching me my place. Now it was time for him to learn his. When I returned from the press conference, Richard was waiting in my office. Gone was the confident, condescending man from last night's dinner. Instead, he sat slumped in one of my visitor chairs, his usually immaculate suit wrinkled, his face ashen as he watched the financial news playing silently on my wall screens. Your secretary wouldn't let me in until you finished your press conference, he said quietly, not looking at me. Had to watch my wife, just a wife, announce the acquisition of my life's work on national television. I moved behind my desk, the leather chair feeling more like a throne as I sat down. The cityscape behind me painted a perfect backdrop for this moment. The empire I'd built while he wasn't looking. How did I not know? He finally turned to face me, his eyes red-rimmed. 7 years, Sarah. 7 years of watching you plan dinner parties and charity events. Those charity events were business meetings, Richard. Every single one of them. The people you dismissed as social climbers were CEOs, venture capitalists, and industry leaders. They came because they wanted to do business with Martinez Partners. He picked up the Crystal Award on my desk, CEO of the Year 2 years running. I remember mocking this when I saw it in your charity office. Called it a participation trophy for fundraising. That charity office was just the front entrance. You never bothered to see the other 49 floors. I gestured to the window behind me. Welcome to the real thing. The night we met, he said slowly, you told me you worked in finance. I laughed and said you must be a secretary. And I never corrected you, I finished. Because the moment you made that assumption, I saw exactly who you were. A man so convinced of his own superiority that he couldn't imagine a woman being his equal, let alone his better. Richard stood abruptly, pacing the expansive office. Is that what this is about? Revenge? Proving you're better than me? No, Richard. This is about business. Pure and simple. Martinez Partners made better offers, showed stronger returns, and demonstrated superior market understanding. The fact that it coincides with your public mockery of my capabilities is just... I paused, letting a small smile play at my lips. Fortunate timing. Fortunate. He spun to face me. You've destroyed everything I built. No, I said firmly, standing to meet his gaze. You did that. Every time you dismissed a woman's business acumen, every time you mocked the idea of female leadership, every time you declared I was just a wife, you were alienating potential partners, losing respect in the industry, and showing exactly why you didn't deserve to keep those contracts. He sank back into the chair, deflated. All those nights you stayed up planning events. Quarterly reports, I corrected. Merger strategies. Acquisition plans. The charity galas you organized. Board meetings. Investment pitches. Client negotiations. Even our anniversary dinner last month was scheduled around the Meridian Corp merger timeline, yes. I sat on the edge of my desk looking down at him. You never once questioned why all the top executives in the city attended my simple charity events. Never wondered why Thomas Chen always asked for my opinion at your business dinners. Never noticed that your biggest clients seemed more interested in talking to your wife than to you. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the muted sounds of the trading floor below. What happens now? He finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Now? I returned to my chair. Now you have a choice. You can fight this. Try to challenge the contracts, claim spousal rights, drag us both through a public legal battle that you'll ultimately lose. Or you can accept that your wife isn't just a wife. That she never was. That while you were busy telling everyone what women couldn't do, I was building something bigger than you ever imagined. Richard stood slowly, straightening his tie in a futile attempt to regain some dignity. And our marriage. I looked at the man I'd married 7 years ago, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. That depends. Can you handle being married to someone who isn't just a wife? Someone who won't sit quietly while you mock her capabilities? Someone who might actually understand business better than you do? He moved to the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. You could have told me, given me a chance to understand. I gave you chances every day for 7 years, Richard. Every time I offered an opinion you dismissed. Every time I made a suggestion you ignored. Every time you told someone I was just a wife, you were choosing not to see who I really was. He nodded slowly, finally understanding. And now everyone sees. Yes, I agreed. Now everyone sees. As the door closed behind him, I turned to look out over the city. My city, built deal by deal while playing the role he had assigned me. On the screens behind me, Richard's company's stock had been suspended from trading, while Martinez Partners' shares soared. Just a wife indeed. 3 months after the revelation that shook the financial world, I sat in the same office where I'd last seen Richard, reviewing the latest quarterly reports. Martinez Partners had not just survived the media storm, we'd thrived in it. Our stock had doubled, and the story of the CEO who built an empire while being dismissed as just a wife had become legend in business circles. Ms. Martinez? My assistant Michael appeared at the door. The divorce papers have been finalized. They just need your signature. I nodded, accepting the folder he handed me. Richard had finally stopped fighting the inevitable 2 weeks ago. After his failed attempt to claim partial ownership of Martinez Partners through marriage rights, a suggestion that made every female executive in New York collectively roll their eyes, he'd retreated to his Hamptons house to lick his wounds. Also, Michael continued, Time magazine is here for the Person of the Year photo shoot. The irony isn't lost on me, I mused, signing the divorce papers with the same pen I'd used to sign the Meridian Corp contracts. From just a wife to Person of the Year in 3 months. The photographer set up while I reviewed the morning's trades. The headline on Bloomberg caught my eye. Montgomery Industries files for Chapter 11, former CEO steps down. Below it was a photo of Richard leaving his lawyer's office, looking aged beyond his years. Ms. Martinez, the Time photographer called, how would you like to be portrayed? I turned to the wall of windows, the city sprawling before me. Just capture me doing what I've always done, running my company. The interview that followed was thoughtful, focusing not just on the dramatic revelation but on the years of work that led to it. The journalist was particularly interested in the dinner parties. Every major deal we closed started at one of those events, I explained. While Richard thought I was planning menus, I was planning mergers. The business world's biggest players came to my charity functions because that's where the real deals happened. And your husband never suspected? I smiled, remembering Richard's dismissive waves whenever I tried to discuss business. He saw what he expected to see. It's amazing what people will overlook when they've already decided what you're capable of. After the interview, Patricia Reynolds stopped by. She'd become a more frequent visitor since the revelation, no longer having to pretend our meetings were about charity events. The business schools want you to speak, she said, settling into the chair Richard had occupied during our last conversation. Harvard, Wharton, Stanford. They all want to hear about the woman who revolutionized how we think about power in business. They want to hear about revenge, I corrected, about a wife taking down her husband. No, Patricia shook her head. They want to hear about a brilliant CEO who built something extraordinary while navigating suffocating expectations. The fact that you maintained your cover for 7 years while outperforming every major firm in the city? That's what they want to understand. I glanced at the divorce papers on my desk. Richard finally signed away his claims this morning. How's he doing? As well as can be expected for a man who lost everything because he couldn't see past his own prejudices. I turned to the window, watching the sunset paint the city gold. The funny thing is, if he'd ever truly partnered with me, we could have built something incredible together. But then you wouldn't be the legend you are now, Patricia smiled. The CEO who hid in plain sight, who turned just a wife into the most powerful phrase in business. My phone buzzed. Another interview request, this time from Forbes. They wanted to do a cover story, The Art of Invisible Power, how Sarah Chin Martinez changed the game. The business world has changed, Patricia observed. No one's going to dismiss a wife's opinions quite so quickly anymore. Good, I said firmly. That was always the point. Not the takedown, not the revenge, but changing how people see power. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one you should watch most carefully. As Patricia left, I opened my laptop to review the latest acquisition proposals. They'd been flooding in since the revelation. Everyone wanted to do business with the woman who'd built an empire in the shadows of someone else's condescension. My phone buzzed again. A text from Richard, signing papers now. For what it's worth, I'm sorry I never saw you. I thought about responding, but what was there to say? He'd had 7 years to see me, to recognize that his wife was more than just a wife. His failure to do so had cost him everything, and had shown the business world that power doesn't always look like we expect it to. Instead, I turned back to my work. There were deals to close, companies to acquire, and a new generation of business leaders to inspire. The days of being just a wife were over. Now I could finally be exactly who I'd always been. A CEO who had proven that the greatest power often lies in being underestimated. On my desk, next to the signed divorce papers, sat the latest issue of Business Weekly with the headline that had become my legacy. The Wife Who Wasn't. How Underestimation Became the Ultimate Business Strategy. I smiled, remembering Richard's words from that fateful dinner. Just a wife? Sometimes the smallest underestimation leads to the biggest fall. My in-laws always treated me like a nobody, insisting that their son was the successful one. At a family dinner, they mocked me for not working. I stayed quiet, until the waiter came with the bill and handed it directly to me, the owner of the restaurant. It was one of those moments that could only be described as a reality-shattering surprise. We were all sitting around the dining table as usual at one of the family gatherings. I had learned over the years to keep quiet and let my husband's family say what they wanted about me, even when it hurt. I'd spent countless dinners biting my tongue while his family, especially his mother and sister, casually mocked me. But this time something was different. The laughter, the comments, the dismissive glances, they all hit harder tonight. I wasn't just the wife of their successful son. I was the invisible one, the one who didn't fit into their vision of success. There they were, sitting across from me, all their smug faces bright with self-importance. My husband, Mike, was in the middle of a conversation with his father, speaking about some new business deal he was involved in, all the while ignoring the cutting comments his family was making about me. I had long ago stopped trying to make them see me. They had already decided who I was. Someone who was always going to play second fiddle to their son. They couldn't see past the fact that Mike had been the breadwinner, the successful one, and in their eyes, I was just a stay-at-home wife who had no right to take credit for anything. Before we dive in, thank you for being here. If you enjoy stories of strength and empowerment, hit that subscribe button. It's free and helps us grow this incredible community. Let's get started. Tonight, however, I could feel something shift inside me. As his sister Lily raised her glass of wine with a mocking smile, she casually mentioned that it was so impressive how Mike had built everything on his own while I stayed home with nothing to show for it. I stayed silent like I always did. But this time I noticed Mike's eyes flicker toward me. It was a look I knew well, the kind of look that seemed to say, "I'm sorry you have to deal with them, but there's nothing I can do." And that was when it hit me. I was done being the quiet one. I had taken it for years, but not anymore. I was no longer going to let their insults go unchallenged. Then just as I was about to say something, the waiter arrived. He wasn't carrying just any bill. He walked straight past Mike and his family, not acknowledging them at all, and handed the check to me. The room fell silent. My heart pounded in my chest. Every eye in the room turned toward me in shock. I didn't even need to look at the bill to know what had just happened. In that moment, my entire world was about to change. I looked up, meeting the waiter's gaze. He didn't flinch, his expression unchanged. "This is for you, ma'am," he said calmly, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. The sound of silverware clinking against plates filled the silence that followed. Mike's family exchanged puzzled glances, their mocking smiles slowly fading. For the first time in all the years I had been with Mike, I saw real confusion on their faces. "Excuse me." Mike's mother, Janet, spoke first. "Why would the bill be handed to you? This is Mike's family dinner, not yours." I couldn't help but smile. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of power building inside me, something I hadn't felt in years. I looked down at the bill, the weight of the moment sinking in. I could feel the tension in the air as everyone waited for an explanation. And that's when I realized the one thing they didn't know. I was the owner of the restaurant. I stood up slowly, my hands gripping the edge of the table. My voice didn't shake as I spoke, even though my heart was racing. "Actually, I own this place," I said, my words falling heavy in the air. The look of disbelief on their faces was priceless, but I wasn't finished yet. "I've been working quietly for years, building this from the ground up. Every penny I've earned, every success I've achieved, none of it was handed to me. It wasn't a gift from Mike or anyone else. It was mine." The room fell into complete silence. The waiter didn't need to say another word, his presence almost irrelevant now. Janet, Mike's mother, opened her mouth but nothing came out. Lily stared at me, her mouth agape, as if she couldn't comprehend what I was saying. Mike, meanwhile, looked like he had seen a ghost. I could see the shock and confusion in his eyes. "Wait, you own this place?" he stammered, his voice barely audible. I nodded, and for the first time in years, I saw a flicker of something in Mike's eyes. Something I couldn't quite place, but it wasn't pride. It was regret. I'd had enough of his passive support over the years, and now, this sudden realization of how little he truly knew about me made everything click into place. It wasn't just the family that had been undermining me all these years. Mike had been complicit in it, silently allowing his family to disrespect me. That had been the breaking point. Mike opened his mouth to say something, but I held up a hand. "Don't," I said, my voice firm. "You and your family have treated me like I was nothing, like I didn't matter. Well, here's the truth. I've been more successful than any of you ever realized, and tonight you're going to see exactly how much I've built on my own." The shock on Mike's face was something I wouldn't forget. His eyes searched mine, but I didn't look away. For the first time in our entire relationship, I wasn't going to be the one who looked down or apologized. It was his turn to feel what it was like to be completely blindsided, to have the world he thought he knew come crashing down around him. The next few moments felt like they stretched on forever. His family, still in shock, murmured among themselves, trying to process what had just happened. I stood there, silently, allowing the weight of the revelation to sink in. I could feel their gazes on me, some filled with disbelief, others tinged with anger. But it didn't matter anymore. In the end, it wasn't just about proving a point to Mike's family. It was about reclaiming my dignity and showing them that I was no longer the quiet wife they could mock. I wasn't a nobody, and I was done letting anyone treat me that way. Tonight I was in control. And it felt better than I could have ever imagined. The silence that filled the room was suffocating. It was as though everything in that moment had been put on pause, and time itself had decided to hold its breath. I stood there, facing my husband's family, their shocked expressions a stark contrast to the calm I was trying desperately to maintain. The waiter had just handed me the bill, and I had casually revealed that I owned the restaurant. Now, as I stood there in the center of their disbelief, my mind was replaying everything that had led me to this exact point. Growing up, I had never imagined myself in this kind of situation. I came from humble beginnings, raised in a small town where everyone knew everyone. My parents worked hard to make ends meet, but they never complained. I learned early on the value of hard work and perseverance. I had dreams, yes, but they weren't the kind of dreams that would make me famous or get me accolades. I just wanted to be respected, to prove that I was capable of more than what people assumed about me. And yet, as the years passed, I found myself married to a man who, despite his love for me, had unknowingly helped perpetuate the image of me as someone who didn't have much to offer beyond being a wife. Mike and I had met in college. He was charming, ambitious, and undeniably successful even back then. He had big dreams and I had admired that. I, on the other hand, was more reserved, focused on my studies, quietly making plans for the future. I wasn't one to boast about my accomplishments, but I had a drive that couldn't be ignored. After graduation we started dating and soon after we were married. I had always supported his career, but somewhere along the way I started losing sight of my own path. His family too seemed to put me in a box. I was the wife, but never the equal. Mike's family always saw him as the shining star, the one who would achieve great things. And they were right, he did. But somewhere along the line, they decided that I wasn't contributing enough. At family dinners it was always the same. They would praise Mike for his latest achievements, his promotions, his business deals. And then, almost as an afterthought, they would turn to me and ask, "So what have you been doing lately?" The tone was never one of genuine interest. It was condescending, almost as if they expected me to be nothing more than a stay-at-home wife. And despite my own growing discomfort with it all, I stayed silent. I stayed silent because I loved Mike and I didn't want to rock the boat. I stayed silent because I thought that someday he would see me for who I really was and maybe, just maybe, he would stand up for me. But that day never came. In the beginning, I had told myself that the family's disregard for me was just their way of expressing love for Mike. After all, they had always been a tight-knit family. But the truth was harder to ignore. They didn't respect me. And even worse, Mike didn't see it. For years, I had silently carried the weight of their judgment, thinking it was just a phase, thinking I would eventually earn their approval. But as time passed, I realized that nothing I did would ever change their perception of me. There were small moments that began to build up over time. Like when Janet, Mike's mother, casually told me that it was a good thing I had Mike to take care of me. Or when Lily, his sister, would laugh and say, "You don't need a job, right? You've got Mike to handle everything for you." It wasn't just that they were undermining my worth. It was that Mike didn't see it. He didn't hear the snide remarks. He didn't notice the way his mother dismissed me in favor of him. The tipping point came one night when I overheard a conversation between Mike and his father. I had been standing just outside the study, gathering my thoughts, when I heard my name mentioned. "I don't know why she just doesn't get it," Mike had said. "She's not cut out for the kind of work I do. She just doesn't have the drive, the ambition." I remember feeling like I had been punched in the stomach. All this time I had been silently fighting, striving to build something for myself, but he had never seen it. He didn't even understand how hard I had worked, how much I had sacrificed. He was too wrapped up in his own success to see mine. The truth was, I had been silently building my own empire, working day and night to create something that was mine, something I could be proud of. But I had done it quietly, so quietly that nobody had noticed. Not even Mike. I was no longer the woman who could sit idly by, pretending that everything was fine. I realized that if I wanted to be seen, truly seen for the person I was and the things I had accomplished, I would have to make them see me. But more than that, I wanted to show Mike, his family, and myself that I was capable of far more than they had ever believed. I was done being the shadow in the background. I knew it wouldn't be easy. For years, I had held on to the belief that if I just kept quiet and played my part, things would eventually change. But that had never happened. Now I was going to change things. I was going to show them all who I really was. That's when the idea struck me. It was bold and it was risky, but it was the only way to make an impact. I would make them see me, make them realize that I wasn't just Mike's wife. I wasn't just a stay-at-home woman who had no ambition. I was more than that. I had built something from nothing, and now it was time to let everyone see what I had accomplished. I started planning. I reached out to the restaurant where we were going to have dinner. It wasn't just any restaurant. It was a place I had built from the ground up. I had invested years of hard work into creating it, and now it was finally going to serve as the backdrop for the moment when everything changed. I arranged for everything to go perfectly. From the moment we walked in, the evening would be set in motion. And then came the dinner. The moment I had been waiting for. The moment when everything would come to a head. I walked into that room fully aware of the judgment in the air. They were going to mock me, dismiss me just like they always had. But this time they wouldn't be able to ignore me. Not when I was the one holding the keys to the future. Not when I was the one who had built it all. The dinner table was set, but it felt like an arena. Each piece of cutlery and glassware just another prop in the performance that was about to unfold. Mike had no idea what I had planned. I could see the excitement in his eyes as he discussed his latest venture with his father, his voice filled with that familiar, self-assured tone that had always made him the center of attention. But as he spoke, I could feel the weight of the moment pressing on me, the tension building as I steeled myself for what was about to happen. This was not just another dinner. This was the moment I would change everything, not just for me but for the family who had so casually dismissed me for years. I could feel their eyes on me. Janet, his mother, barely masking her disdain as she sipped her wine, the corners of her mouth curling into a knowing smile. She had always made it clear that she thought I was beneath them, never good enough for her son. And Lily, Mike's sister, sitting there with that condescending grin of hers, like she held all the answers to life. They were so comfortable in their little world, so used to their roles as the successful family, that they didn't even see me anymore. But tonight that would change. I could hear them speaking in hushed tones now, their voices growing louder as they discussed everything under the sun except for me. They were so wrapped up in themselves, so caught in the illusion of their own superiority, that they had no idea what was about to unfold. I looked over at Mike, whose attention was still fixed on his father, and I realized just how deep the divide had grown between us. For years I had been his silent partner, always supporting him, always lifting him up, while my own aspirations were pushed to the side, invisible beneath the weight of his career and family expectations. The waiter came to refill our drinks and I took a moment to steady myself. My heart raced, but I refused to let the nerves show. This was the culmination of everything I had been working for, all the years of quiet struggle, all the times I had been belittled or overlooked. Tonight I wasn't just going to reveal my success, I was going to show them how wrong they had been to underestimate me. I had spent too long in the shadows of their judgments and I was done with it. When the waiter finally approached with the bill, I could feel the energy in the room shift. Mike, unaware of what was coming, reached out to take the check. But the waiter walked right past him, bypassing his extended hand and heading straight for me. The sudden silence in the room was deafening. Janet's face tightened, and Lily's grin faltered as the waiter handed me the bill without a word. I could feel their gazes on me, sharp and accusatory. Mike looked confused, but there was a flicker of realization in his eyes. I took the bill in my hands, letting the weight of the moment settle over me. For the first time in years, I was no longer hiding behind my husband's shadow. I wasn't the quiet wife who had to pretend to be content with her place. I wasn't just Mike's accessory, his silent supporter. I had built something of my own and now it was time for them to see it. I looked up slowly, meeting Mike's eyes for the first time that evening. The tension between us was palpable, like the quiet before a storm. The weight of everything unsaid hung in the air, and I knew in that moment that the truth was about to come crashing down. I own this restaurant, I said, my voice calm, but the power in my words undeniable. The silence that followed was deafening. Janet's mouth hung open, her eyes wide with disbelief. Lily's expression shifted from mockery to confusion, and even Mike seemed stunned. For a moment nobody moved, nobody spoke. It was as if the entire world had paused. I took a deep breath, steadying myself as I continued. I didn't just marry Mike and become part of this family. I worked for everything I have. I built this place from the ground up, while you all stood by and assumed I had nothing to offer. I could feel their eyes boring into me, but I didn't look away. I wasn't going to let them see me break, not now, not when I was so close to finally being seen for who I really was. Mike's face was pale. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Janet, too, looked lost for words, the smirk she usually wore now replaced with something far less confident. Lily, who had always prided herself on her ability to belittle me, seemed utterly stunned. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected me to be anything more than the quiet wife who stayed home while Mike built his empire. But I had built my own quietly in the background. And now they would have to reckon with that. The tension in the room was suffocating. The kind of tension that builds slowly like a storm on the horizon waiting to break. I could see the wheels turning in Mike's mind as he processed what I had just said. His eyes flickered between me and his family, searching for something, anything to explain what was happening. But there was no explanation. This was the truth. And in that moment I realized that I had been living a lie for too long, letting them see me as nothing more than a passive participant in my own life. No more. But there was something more to this revelation. Something deeper that I hadn't yet told them. The truth wasn't just that I owned the restaurant. It was that I had been holding the family's financial future in my hands, even while they dismissed me. The investments I had made, the risks I had taken, all of it had been carefully planned. And while they were busy congratulating Mike on his success, they had no idea that it was my hard work, my sacrifice, and my vision that had played an instrumental role in their comfortable lives. Mike's expression shifted. At first there was confusion, then disbelief, and finally regret. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I could see it in his eyes, the realization that he had been blind to everything I had done for so long. He had never truly understood what I was capable of. And now the moment of reckoning had arrived. The silence was broken only by the clink of the glass as Lily set it down on the table. "How long have you been hiding this from us?" she asked, her voice a mix of surprise and disbelief. It wasn't a question, at least not one meant to understand. It was an accusation. But it didn't matter anymore. I had said what I needed to say. The truth was out and there was no taking it back. The room was no longer the comfortable, familiar space it had been just moments before. It was charged with tension, with the realization that the dynamic had shifted, perhaps forever. The foundation of everything they thought they knew about me had crumbled, and now they had to reckon with the new reality I had revealed. In that moment I knew I had done the right thing. It wasn't just about showing them who I was. It was about showing myself who I was. The woman who had been buried beneath their expectations for so long had finally risen. And now there was no going back. The room remained silent for what seemed like an eternity after my revelation. My eyes scanned the faces around the table. Mike's family, once so confident and self-assured, now looked bewildered and uncomfortable. I could see the mix of emotions playing out across their faces. Disbelief, confusion, and perhaps a hint of regret. It was clear that they had underestimated me. And yet, as much as I wanted to savor the moment, I knew that this wasn't enough. It wasn't enough just to show them that I wasn't the passive wife they thought I was. I needed to make them understand the full scope of what I had been doing behind the scenes, and most importantly, I needed to make Mike see how wrong he had been all these years. In the days following that dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that the truth had only scratched the surface. Yes, they knew now that I owned the restaurant, but that wasn't all. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was how much more I had built. My restaurant was just the beginning. I had invested in multiple properties, made smart business decisions, and quietly, without anyone's knowledge, I had created a network that was steadily growing in power and influence. I wasn't just a wife. I wasn't just a silent partner in Mike's world. I had become a force to be reckoned with on my own terms. And that's when the idea hit me. It wasn't enough to just tell them. I needed to show them. I needed to make them feel the weight of their years of dismissive behavior. I wasn't angry. Not in the way they might have expected. What I felt now was something far more powerful, a deep, unshakable resolve. I wasn't just going to take my place in the world. I was going to make them understand exactly what they had missed all these years. I would do it in a way that would make them question their own judgment and, perhaps for the first time, make Mike realize the true cost of his complacency. I started planning carefully. It had to be precise. If I was going to execute this plan, it couldn't be rushed or haphazard. I would need to tap into the resources I had built over the years, the networks I had quietly cultivated. I knew that Mike's family was always so quick to applaud his business acumen, always so willing to turn a blind eye to the work I had been doing. Well, I would take that very same business acumen and use it to turn the tables on them. It began with the restaurants. I had invested in several properties under different names, always keeping a low profile. But the real magic of my plan lay in the way I could tie all of these ventures together, make them interdependent in a way that would leave Mike's family with no option but to face the consequences of their past treatment of me. One night I made a few phone calls. It wasn't anything extravagant. I didn't need to create a spectacle. Instead, I worked behind the scenes, orchestrating deals that would come to fruition at just the right time. I had already contacted the suppliers who had always treated me with respect. People who had seen the potential in me long before Mike's family had even noticed. They were ready to help. I secured contracts that would ensure the next few weeks would unfold exactly as I planned. The goal wasn't to destroy anyone. It was to make them realize the delicate balance they had taken for granted for so long. Over the next few days I could sense Mike's confusion. He had tried calling me multiple times, but I didn't pick up. I needed him to feel the weight of his own ignorance. The worst thing I could do right now was let him off easy. He had been complicit in this. He had allowed his family to disrespect me for years, And now it was time for him to fully grasp the consequences of that. The tension between us grew, and I could see it in his eyes whenever he looked at me. There was a deep regret there, but there was also something else. Something that reminded me of the man I had married, the man who had always been so focused on his own success that he failed to notice mine. He had been blind, and now that blindness was beginning to crack. But I knew better than to give him comfort too soon. He needed to see that I wasn't going to stand by and watch him continue to let his family trample over me. As the days passed, I could feel the change in the air. Mike's phone calls were now mixed with questions. Questions about my business, questions about my future plans. He was trying to understand what had been happening in the background. But what he didn't know was that I had already set everything in motion. The first part of my plan unfolded on a quiet Wednesday. I invited Mike's family to another dinner, but this time it wasn't at a restaurant. No, this time it was in the heart of the business I had built. They walked into the private dining room, unaware that they were about to witness the full scale of what I had been doing all these years. I had arranged for a series of displays showcasing the various projects I had quietly invested in, properties, startups, and partnerships, all of them linked to the very thing they had dismissed as insignificant. The look on Janet's face when she saw the first display of my work was priceless. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She glanced at Mike, but he was still trying to process the enormity of it all. This wasn't just about a restaurant anymore. This was a full-scale operation, a vision I had cultivated and nurtured from the ground up. And as I watched them slowly come to realize the magnitude of what they had failed to see, I knew that I had made my point. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about respect. But the real twist came when I finally handed Mike the key to a new project. A project I had kept under wraps for months. This new venture, a luxury hotel that would rival some of the finest in the city, was mine. The contract was signed and everything was ready to go. It was all in his name, everything we had discussed, everything he had believed was his. But it wasn't his at all. It was mine, and I had created it while they all sat there blind to my efforts. As I handed Mike the key, his face drained of color. The weight of the truth settled over him, and for the first time, I saw him truly see me. Not just as his wife, not just as the woman who had been by his side, but as an equal. It was too late for apologies, too late for explanations. The time for that had passed. But I had gotten what I wanted. I had made my point. Mike's family stared in stunned silence. The tables had turned, and I wasn't just a passive spectator in their world anymore. I was the one with the power now, and they would never forget that. The true measure of respect wasn't in their acknowledgement, but in the way I had risen above their petty judgments and stood tall on my own. And that, I realized, was the most satisfying victory of all. The tension in the room was palpable as Mike took the key from my hand. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The weight of the truth hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Mike's eyes moved from the key to the documents laid out on the table, the realization slowly dawning on him. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. I could see the confusion in his eyes, the desperation for answers. His hands trembled slightly as he looked back at me, almost as if he was searching for an explanation that didn't come. But this time there was no explanation I could give him. There was nothing left to say. "I've spent years building this," I said, my voice calm but firm. "And not once did I get the respect I deserved from you or your family. You had no idea, did you? No idea what I was capable of while you were out there chasing your dreams and forgetting about me. Well, now you know." The silence that followed was thick, every second stretching into what felt like an eternity. His family sat motionless, their faces etched with shock and disbelief. Janet's expression was frozen, her mouth slightly agape as she processed what was unfolding before her eyes. Lily, too, was speechless, her usual smugness replaced by a stunned silence. This wasn't the dinner they had imagined. This wasn't the spectacle they were used to. But it was the one they had unknowingly set in motion when they underestimated me. Mike finally spoke, his voice low, almost hesitant. I don't understand. How did I not know? Why didn't you tell me?" His eyes were wide with guilt now, a sharp contrast to the confident man I had known for so long. I could feel the bitterness rising in me, but I swallowed it down. There was no place for bitterness anymore. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment I would finally get the respect I deserved. Not from his family, not from Mike, but from myself. I was finally owning my success, not as a quiet partner, not as an accessory to his life, but as someone who had worked tirelessly to build something of my own. You didn't see me, I said quietly, my gaze steady. You never saw me. And now you can't unsee it. I motioned to the documents, the contracts, the projects that spanned the table. This is who I am. This is what I've built. I didn't need your permission and I didn't need your approval. But it sure would have been nice to have had it. The words were out before I could stop them, but it felt good to finally speak my truth. For too long, I had been the silent observer, the one who stayed in the background, playing the supportive wife while Mike and his family took center stage. But now I was done. I was done being the quiet one. I was done pretending that my success didn't matter. Mike's gaze flickered between me and his family, a mix of emotions playing out on his face. Surprise, guilt, confusion. It was clear he was struggling to process what was happening, to come to terms with the fact that everything he had taken for granted was shifting beneath his feet. But it wasn't just Mike who was struggling. His family, too, was beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. Janet, who had always looked at me as though I was beneath her, was now looking at me with something I couldn't quite place. Was it respect? Or fear? Whatever it was new. It was something she hadn't felt toward me before. Lily, on the other hand, was visibly shaken. The smugness that had once been a permanent fixture on her face was gone, replaced by a raw vulnerability I had never seen in her. She wasn't the confident, sharp-tongued sister anymore. She was just a woman realizing for the first time that she had misjudged me completely. And while part of me wanted to revel in the moment, to bask in the satisfaction of their discomfort, I knew better. This wasn't about them anymore. This was about me. This was about reclaiming my power and owning the life I had built. Mike's voice cracked as he finally spoke again. I never meant to hurt you, he said, his words heavy with regret. I don't know. I guess I didn't see it. I didn't see you. I didn't respond right away. There was nothing more to say. He hadn't seen me. That was the truth of it. He had been so wrapped up in his own world, so caught up in his own success, that he hadn't even noticed the woman beside him, the woman who had been quietly working, quietly sacrificing to make a future for both of them. And now it was too late. I had done this for myself. I had built this for myself. And if he wanted to be part of it, he would have to work to earn it. The sound of a chair scraping against the floor interrupted the silence. Mike stood up, his face pale, his hands trembling. He took a step toward me, but I held up a hand, stopping him in his tracks. No, I said firmly. Don't come any closer. This isn't about fixing things. It's about understanding. His face crumpled with emotion, and for the first time in our marriage I saw vulnerability in him. It was a side of him I had never seen before. It was clear he felt guilty, but guilt wasn't enough anymore. It wasn't enough to undo the years of neglect, the years of dismissing me. It wasn't enough to erase the hurt that had been building up inside me for so long. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Mike, I continued, my voice steady. But I am asking for your respect. Not just as your wife, but as the woman I am, the woman I've always been. The room was silent again, the weight of my words hanging in the air. I could feel the shift happening, slow but undeniable. The dynamic had changed. Mike's family had never seen me as their equal, but now they couldn't ignore me. They couldn't pretend that I was just some accessory to Mike's success. I was his equal, and more importantly, I was my own person. I had built something worth respecting, and that was something I would never let them take away from me again. As I stood there facing the family that had once belittled me, I realized something profound. Revenge wasn't about hurting them. It wasn't about causing pain. It was about showing them my strength, my resilience. It was about proving to myself that I was more than their assumptions. And as I saw the regret on Mike's face and the stunned silence around the table, I knew I had won. Not because they admitted defeat, but because I had finally found my voice. And that, I realized, was the most powerful revenge of all. As the night wore on, the tension in the room slowly began to dissipate, but the weight of the events that had unfolded lingered like a cloud over us. Mike stood there, his hands trembling, not knowing what to say next. It wasn't just the key I had handed him, or the papers that laid scattered across the table. It was the realization that everything he thought he knew about me, about our marriage, had been shattered. There was no going back from this moment, no erasing the truth that had been laid bare for everyone to see. I had done what I set out to do. I had made Mike, his family, and even myself see the woman I had become. The woman who had worked tirelessly, quietly, to build a life and a legacy that was mine alone. But as I stood there watching him struggle to come to terms with everything I had revealed, I couldn't help but wonder if it was all worth it. Was this what I had been waiting for? The vindication, the acknowledgement? Or was it something more, something deeper that I had been searching for all along? Mike's voice broke the silence, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt a pang of uncertainty. "I never knew," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I never understood what you were doing, what you were capable of." His eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw something in them that I had longed for but never truly received: genuine remorse. But it was too late. The years of neglect, the years of being sidelined in favor of his success, could not be undone with a few words. He had never seen me, not the way I needed him to. And while I could feel the sorrow in his voice, I also knew that I had finally found the strength to stand on my own, without needing his approval or validation. "You didn't see me because you were too busy seeing what you wanted to see," I said, my voice calm, but there was a sharpness to it that I couldn't quite hide. "I've spent years supporting you, putting everything I had into making our life work, while you and your family dismissed me as nothing more than a bystander. Well, now you can see me. You can see everything I've built. And you can see that I don't need your approval." Mike opened his mouth as if to say something, but I held up my hand, silencing him. "There's nothing more to say," I continued. "I've been living in the shadow of your family's expectations for too long, and I'm done. I'm done being the wife who stays quiet, who waits for the scraps of attention. I've earned my place in this world, and I don't need your family to acknowledge it for me to know my worth." His face softened, and for the briefest moment, I saw a flicker of the man I had fallen in love with. But that man was gone, replaced by someone who was just beginning to understand the consequences of his inaction. He had been so focused on his own success, so wrapped up in his own ambitions, that he had failed to see the woman who had stood by him, supporting him every step of the way. And now he was paying the price. The rest of his family sat in stunned silence, unable to process the revelation before them. Janet, who had always looked at me with disdain, now seemed almost remorseful. But her apology, if there was one, was never spoken. Lily, who had been so quick to mock me in the past, now seemed unsure of herself, her eyes darting nervously between me and Mike. The power dynamics had shifted, and it was clear that they were beginning to understand the full extent of what they had overlooked. But I wasn't looking for their approval. I wasn't waiting for their acknowledgement. The truth was, I had already moved past that. I had proven to myself that I was capable of so much more than I had been given credit for. And now I was free from the shackles of their expectations. I was free to live my life on my terms, to build something that was truly mine. As I stood there, facing the family that had once dismissed me, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had done it. I had proven that I was more than just the wife in the background, more than just a supporting role in someone else's story. I had written my own narrative, one where I was the protagonist, the hero of my own journey. Mike stood there, still processing everything, but I could see the shift in him. He had finally seen me for who I truly was, and I could tell that he was beginning to understand the depth of his mistakes. But the truth was, I no longer needed his redemption. I didn't need him to fix things because I had already fixed myself. I had taken control of my own destiny, and that was something no one could ever take away from me. In the days that followed, things began to change. Mike, though still struggling with the reality of what had happened, started making efforts to understand me better. He began asking questions about my businesses, my plans, and my vision. And for the first time, I felt like he was actually listening, not out of obligation but because he genuinely wanted to understand who I had become. But I knew deep down that it was too late. The years of being unseen, unheard, had left a scar that could never be fully healed. As for his family, their attitude shifted too. It wasn't immediate and it wasn't perfect, but over time I saw a change in them. Janet, while still maintaining a certain level of reserve, began to treat me with more respect. Lily, who had always been the most vocal in her criticisms, started to acknowledge my achievements, albeit begrudgingly. But none of this mattered to me anymore. I had already proven that I didn't need their approval to succeed. I had already proven that I could stand on my own 2 feet. The final twist came when I received an unexpected call from Mike's father, who had been strangely quiet during the entire ordeal. "I never realized," he said, his voice tinged with regret. "I never realized what you were doing. You've shown us all that we were wrong. And for that I'm sorry." His words, though late, carried weight. But they were not what I had been waiting for. What I had been waiting for was my own self-acceptance, and in that moment I realized that I had already achieved it. I had set out to prove my worth not to them but to myself. And in the end that was the most powerful victory of all. At our baby shower my husband raised a toast, not to me but to his mother. "She's the one raising our child," he said. I was just the vessel. No one noticed when I quietly slipped out that evening. But the next morning something landed on their doorstep that changed everything. "She's the one raising our child," Austin announced, raising his champagne flute toward his beaming mother instead of me. "Kelsey's just the vessel God chose." The room erupted in polite applause while something inside me shattered more completely than the glass I deliberately dropped at my feet. 7 months pregnant at my own baby shower, and I'd finally heard the truth they'd been whispering all along. But the suffocation began long before this moment of public humiliation. It started gradually, like a room slowly running out of oxygen, so subtle you don't notice until you're gasping for air. When I first took my position at Oak Ridge Middle School in Henderson, Ohio, population 8,742, I was Kelsey Watson, fresh out of college with big ideas about inspiring young minds. The brick schoolhouse with its squeaky floors and outdated textbooks became my second home. Between my classroom walls, decorated with student artwork and inspirational quotes, I found purpose in helping 7th graders navigate the awkward journey between childhood and adolescence. "Ms. Watson, will we ever use Romeo and Juliet in real life?" Zach Peterson asked during third period. "You'll use the critical thinking skills we're developing," I replied with the certainty that came easily within these walls. "And maybe you'll understand people's motivations a little better." If only I'd applied those same skills to my own life. Perhaps I would have noticed the warning signs when Austin Miller, the handsome insurance agent from the family that practically founded Henderson, started showing interest in me at church functions. Perhaps I would have questioned why our dates always included his mother Jocelyn, or why decisions as simple as which movie to see required her approval. "Mom's opinion means everything to me," Austin had explained proudly, and I had found it endearing. A man who respected his mother must surely respect women in general, right? What a tragic misreading that had been. By the time we married, the pattern was established. Our honeymoon destination changed from the beach cottage I'd researched to the mountain resort Jocelyn preferred. Our house, just 3 blocks from hers, was furnished according to her specifications, not mine. Even our dinner conversations were dominated by Jocelyn's daily calls, with Austin excusing himself to speak privately with her while my food grew cold. "It's just how the Millers are," my colleague Barbara had commented when I mentioned it in the teacher's lounge. "That woman has had Austin wrapped around her finger since his father died. Everyone knows it. Everyone except me, apparently. The pregnancy was an accident. A beautiful one, I thought. The plus sign on the test had filled me with such hope. Perhaps a baby would finally make me central to Austin's life. Perhaps now I would matter more than his mother. Instead, my pregnancy accelerated my disappearance. The first prenatal appointment should have been magical. I'd imagined Austin holding my hand as we heard our baby's heartbeat for the first time. Instead, I lay on the examination table, surprised and uncomfortable as Jocelyn swept into the room behind my husband. "Mom was a nurse for 30 years, Austin explained to the obstetrician. "She knows what to look for." Dr. Richardson smiled politely. "I understand, but for privacy reasons." "Nonsense," Jocelyn interrupted. "Kelsey doesn't mind. Do you, dear?" 3 pairs of eyes turned to me. I felt my throat tighten, the familiar pressure of being outnumbered. "I suppose it's fine," I whispered, the words sticking like thorns. The heartbeat filled the room, fast and strong. Tears sprang to my eyes at the miraculous sound, but Jocelyn was already questioning the doctor about measurements and growth percentiles. "Is everything normal?" I managed to ask. "Everything looks perfect," Dr. Richardson assured me, but she was looking at Jocelyn, not at me. By the next appointment, Jocelyn had compiled a list of questions and concerns. By the third, she was insisting on changing my diet and exercise routine. By the fourth, she had convinced Austin that Dr. Richardson was too inexperienced, and they transferred my care to Dr. Myers, the older male doctor who had delivered Austin himself. "Miller babies need experienced hands," Jocelyn insisted. "Myers knows our family history." When I arrived for my 20-week scan, The receptionist handed me forms to sign for the transfer. I hadn't authorized it. I hadn't even been consulted. Your mother-in-law took care of everything, the receptionist explained with a smile. She said you were too busy with work to handle the details. I sat in the waiting room, forms clutched in my trembling hands as Austin and Jocelyn arrived together. They'd come directly from lunch, a lunch I hadn't been invited to. Oh good, you're signing the transfer papers, Austin said, patting my shoulder. Mom says Dr. Myers is the best in the state. I liked Dr. Richardson, I said quietly. She listened to me. Myers will know what's best for the baby, Jocelyn replied, her voice gentle but her eyes hard. That's what matters now, isn't it? Not your comfort but what's best for the baby. The message was clear. My preferences were selfish. The baby, the Miller heir, was all that mattered. I was merely the vessel. Lisa Matthews noticed the change in me first. We'd started at Oak Ridge together 6 years ago, sharing lesson plans and lunch duty. Her classroom was across the hall from mine, and we often walked to the parking lot together after staff meetings. You're quieter these days, she remarked one afternoon, studying my face. Everything okay with the baby? The baby's fine, I replied automatically, the rehearsed answer to a question I'd been asked countless times. I didn't ask about the baby, Lisa said gently. I asked about you. Something in her tone, genuine concern, not the superficial interest of Austin's family friends, made my eyes sting with unexpected tears. I blinked them away quickly. Just tired, I managed. Pregnancy hormones, you know. Lisa wasn't fooled. When's the last time you chose something for yourself, Kelsey? Something small even. Movie? A meal? I couldn't remember. The realization struck me like a physical blow. My clothes were selected from options Jocelyn deemed appropriate. My groceries were purchased according to the list she provided for optimal fetal development. Even my classroom decorations had been influenced by her comment that bright colors can be so tacky in educational settings. It's not that bad, I defended weakly. Jocelyn means well. My sister said the same thing about her mother-in-law, Lisa replied. Now she needs permission to take her own kids to the park. Just, be careful, okay? You're starting to disappear. Her words haunted me as I drove home, where I found Jocelyn in our nursery, directing the delivery men who were assembling a crib, a massive cherrywood piece I'd never seen before. What happened to the white crib we picked out? I asked, confused. Austin and I had spent a Saturday at the baby store, testing various models before selecting one together. This was Austin's, Jocelyn explained, running her hand lovingly over the dark wood. All Miller babies sleep in it. I've been saving it in my attic. But we already ordered. I cancelled that flimsy modern thing, she interrupted. This is solid craftsmanship. Much safer. I looked to Austin, who had appeared in the doorway behind me. Did you know about this? Mom texted me at work, he said with a shrug. Makes sense to save the money and use a family heirloom, right? It wasn't about the money. The Miller family had more than enough, between Austin's successful insurance agency and Jocelyn's late husband's investments. It was about erasing another of my choices, another piece of me. The baby shower preparations became the final battlefield of my diminishing existence. What should have been my celebration was completely commandeered by Jocelyn. The invitations, pale blue, though we didn't know the baby's gender, announced a blessed addition to the Miller family without once mentioning my name. Shouldn't it say something about it being my shower? I asked Austin one evening, showing him the invitation. Mom has a feeling it's a boy, he replied, barely looking up from his phone. And everyone knows you're part of the Miller family. But was I? As the plans progressed, my suggestions were systematically dismissed. The venue I wanted, a charming tea house downtown, was vetoed in favor of the church hall where every Miller event had been held for generations. The guest list expanded to include Jocelyn's bridge club and church circle, women I'd met perhaps once at previous Miller gatherings. I was thinking we could play that game where guests bring a book instead of a card, I ventured during one planning session at Jocelyn's dining room table. To build the baby's library. We already have all of Austin's childhood books in the attic, Jocelyn dismissed. And I've ordered those lovely Miller family baby books, monogrammed of course. Austin smiled at his mother. Always thinking ahead, Mom. Neither of them looked at me, sitting there with my unheard voice and my growing child. Neither noticed as another small piece of me disappeared into silence. The morning of the shower, I stood before my closet, eyeing the pale blue maternity dress Jocelyn had delivered the previous day. To match the decorations, the note had read, "I'd planned to wear the yellow sundress my sister had sent, the one that made me feel pretty despite my swollen ankles and stretched skin. You're not wearing that, are you?" Austin asked when I emerged in yellow. "Mom went to a lot of trouble to coordinate everything." "I like this dress," I said, my voice smaller than I intended. "My sister picked it specially." Austin's expression hardened. "It's just one day, Kelsey. Can't you think about what would make Mom happy for once?" For once. When had I ever done anything but accommodate Jocelyn? When had my preferences ever mattered? But as always, I relented, changing into the blue dress that made me look pale and washed out. As I fastened the pearl buttons at the collar, high and conservative, like all of Jocelyn's approved maternity wear, I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. Where was the passionate teacher who had once backpacked through Europe during summer break? Where was the woman who had strong opinions about literature and politics? Where was Kelsey Watson? I was disappearing breath by breath, choice by choice, day by day. The blue dress was just another piece of the suffocation, another thread in the fabric slowly wrapping around my throat. Little did I know that Austin's toast would be the final constriction, the moment when I would either break free or stop breathing altogether. The community center looked nothing like I remembered from town meetings and school fundraisers. Blue and silver streamers cascaded from the ceiling beams. Centerpieces featuring miniature baby carriages adorned each table. A banner reading, "Welcome Baby Miller," stretched across the front wall. Not Kelsey and Austin's baby, or even a simple baby shower. Just Baby Miller, as if I were merely an incubator for the family name. I stood awkwardly near the entrance as Jocelyn greeted guests, accepting hugs and congratulations meant for me. The blue dress felt tight around my collar, despite having been perfectly measured. Perhaps it was just the suffocation creeping up my neck. "Kelsey." A familiar voice cut through the practiced pleasantries. My sister Rachel barreled toward me, her dark curls bouncing with each step. She wrapped me in a fierce hug, then pulled back to study my face. "You look terrible." "Thanks," I managed a weak smile. 7 months pregnant will do that. "That's not what I mean." Her eyes narrowed. "What's with the funeral dress? And why is your mother-in-law playing hostess at your shower?" Before I could respond, Jocelyn appeared at my elbow, her hand gripping my arm just slightly too tight. "Rachel, so glad you could make it from Chicago." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Kelsey, Mrs. Peterson is asking about your due date. Why don't you mingle while I finish setting up the games?" It wasn't a suggestion. I squeezed Rachel's hand before being steered toward a cluster of Austin's family friends, women who'd known him since childhood but could barely remember my name. "There she is," Mrs. Peterson exclaimed, just glowing. Her eyes darted to my midsection rather than my face. "When are you due again, dear?" Mrs. Franklin asked, her head tilted in exaggerated interest. "September 15th, I replied. "Just in time for the Miller family reunion," someone remarked. "Jocelyn must be thrilled." I nodded automatically. I'd never been invited to plan for this reunion, though it had been mentioned countless times. Another family event where I would be present but not participating, visible but not seen. Rachel found me again as I examined the elaborate dessert table. "This is weird, Kels," she whispered. "Half these women don't even know you." "They're Austin's mother's friends," I explained. "It's important to her." "And what about what's important to you?" Rachel's directness had always been both her best and most uncomfortable quality. "Since when do you let someone else run your life?" "Since the day I said I do," I thought but didn't say. "It's complicated," I murmured instead. "It's not complicated. It's wrong." Rachel's eyes flashed. "You've changed, Kelsey. You're like a shadow of yourself." Before I could defend myself, or admit she was right, Jocelyn's voice carried through the community center. "Ladies, please take your seats. The games are about to begin." The first game was a quiz about Austin's childhood, questions no one but Jocelyn could answer correctly. Question 3, Jocelyn announced with theatrical flair. "What was baby Austin's first word?" Women scribbled guesses on blue note cards while I sat with my blank card. Austin had never told me his first word. It had never come up in our 3 years together. The answer is Mama, Jocelyn declared proudly. He was the most devoted little boy. Rachel rolled her eyes beside me. Of course it was, she muttered. The games continued, all centered around Miller family history or Austin's preferences. Not a single question about me, the mother of the child, being celebrated. By the third game, pin the diaper on the Miller family crest, Rachel had given up pretending to participate and was checking flight schedules on her phone. I can change my return to tomorrow if you want to leave with me, she whispered. This isn't normal, Kelsey. I can't just leave, I whispered back, though part of me desperately wanted to. Why not? These people don't even see you. Her words stung because they were true. I excused myself, needing a moment away from the suffocating cheerfulness, the constant refrain of Miller traditions, and just like when Austin was little. In the hallway outside the main room, I paused near the water fountain, taking deep breaths. Voices drifted from around the corner. Jocelyn's bridge club friends, taking a smoke break despite the no smoking signs. Already set up the nursery at her house, one was saying. Complete duplicate of everything they have at home. For when the baby stays at grandma's? Another asked. From what Jocelyn says, that'll be most of the time. Apparently the girl wants to go back to teaching right away. Selfish if you ask me. Jocelyn raised 3 children without ever leaving them with a sitter. Well, this generation, they think careers matter more than family. Thank goodness Jocelyn will be there to give that baby proper attention. My hands trembled as their words washed over me. Duplicate nursery? Most of the time? I'd mentioned wanting to return to teaching eventually. Not immediately, not full-time, just eventually. One casual comment, twisted into evidence of my inadequacy as a mother before my child was even born. I slipped back into the main room unnoticed. The gift table overflowed with blue-wrapped packages. Rachel caught my eye, raising an eyebrow in silent question. I shook my head slightly, not ready to explain what I'd overheard. The side door opened and Austin entered to scattered applause. He'd been golfing with his father's old friends all morning, promising to make an appearance at some point. His presence immediately shifted the energy of the room. Jocelyn straightened her already perfect posture, her face glowing with pride as he kissed her cheek before making his way to me. You look nice, he said, touching my arm briefly before accepting a flute of champagne from a passing server. No kiss, no hand on my belly, no acknowledgement of our child beyond the obligatory comment. Time for the toast, Jocelyn announced, gesturing for everyone to gather. Austin moved to the front of the room, champagne raised. This was it, the moment when my husband would finally acknowledge me, would thank our friends and family for celebrating our child, would perhaps even express his love for me, the mother of his baby. I want to thank everyone for coming today, he began, his voice carrying across the room. Especially those who traveled from out of town. He mentioned his father's old college roommate by name. He thanked Mrs. Peterson for knitting a baby blanket. He acknowledged his boss for the generous paternity leave. But most of all, he continued, raising his glass higher, I want to thank my mother. My smile froze. Mom, without you none of this would be possible. You've been there every step of the way, helping us choose the right doctor, decorating the nursery, making sure everything is perfect for your grandson's arrival. Jocelyn beamed, pressing a hand to her heart. You're the one who's really going to be raising this child, Austin said, his words slicing through the room. Teaching him the Miller values, showing him what really matters in life. Kelsey's just the vessel God chose to bring him into the world. But you're his real guide. A chorus of "ohs" rippled through the crowd. Glass clinked against glass. Women dabbed at their eyes. Rachel's hand found mine under the table, squeezing so hard it hurt. No one looked at me. No one noticed my hands trembling in my lap. No one saw when I quietly stood and walked out the side door, through the parking lot and into my car. Tears blurred my vision as I drove home, the words echoing in my head. Just the vessel. Not the mother. Not the wife. Not even a person. Just a container valuable only for what I carried. For the first time I saw my marriage clearly, not what I'd hoped it would become but what it truly was. A slow, genteel burial of the woman I had been, the woman I still wanted to be. A beautiful coffin lined with Miller traditions and proper appearances, lowered inch by inch into the ground while I smiled and thanked everyone for attending. The house felt different when I pulled into the driveway. Emptier somehow, though nothing had changed. My wedding photo smiled mockingly from the entryway table, Austin's arm around my shoulders, Jocelyn standing just behind us, her hand possessively on his other arm. How had I never noticed that detail before? How had I missed so many signs? I moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching furniture I'd never chosen, looking at paint colors I'd never picked. Nothing here belonged to me, not even the life growing inside me. The attic was the only place Jocelyn rarely ventured, too dusty for her designer slacks, too disorganized for her controlling nature. I climbed the narrow stairs, pull-cord light illuminating boxes stacked in neat rows. Most contained Austin's childhood treasures, carefully preserved by his mother, but in the far corner sat 3 cardboard boxes labeled Kelsey, College. My past life. The one where I had opinions and dreams and a voice. I opened the first box, fingers trembling as I lifted out my college yearbooks, old journals and photo albums. Memories of a woman who once stood her ground, who once believed her thoughts mattered. Who was she? Could I find her again? A smaller box caught my eye, tucked between 2 larger ones. My wedding mementos. Cards, the dried bouquet, the garter I'd never actually thrown because Jocelyn thought it was tacky. I pulled it toward me, needing to remember if there had ever been real love between Austin and me, or if I'd been the vessel from the very beginning. Inside, beneath tissue paper and ribbon, lay a photo album I didn't recognize. The cover was expensive leather, embossed with the initials AM and AC. Austin Miller and, who? I'd been Kelsey Watson before our marriage. My heart stuttered as I opened to the first page. Austin, younger and more carefree than I'd ever seen him, arms wrapped around a stunning blonde. Austin and Allison, senior year, read the caption in flowing script. They looked happy. They looked in love. They looked like equals. I vaguely remembered an Allison from conversations early in our relationship. My college girlfriend, Austin had explained dismissively. Mom never thought she was good enough for me. I turned the pages slowly, watching their relationship unfold through carefully preserved photographs. Homecoming, Christmas, spring break in Cancun. The final photo showed them at graduation, eyes locked on each other rather than the camera. Tucked into the back cover was an envelope, the paper expensive and cream-colored. I hesitated, knowing I was crossing a line but unable to stop myself. Inside was a letter dated just 2 weeks before I met Austin at a church fundraiser. My dearest Austin, it began in elegant handwriting. Your mother's ultimatum breaks my heart, but I understand the position you're in. The Miller family business and name must come first. They always have. Perhaps someday you'll find the courage to make your own choices, but I cannot wait forever while you try to please a woman who will never be satisfied with anyone you choose. I will always love you, but I deserve someone who puts me first. Goodbye. Allison. My hands shook as I processed what I was reading. Jocelyn had forced their breakup. Austin had chosen his mother over the woman he loved. And then he'd met me, the agreeable, accommodating middle school teacher who didn't challenge him, who tried so hard to fit into the Miller mold. Had he ever loved me at all? Or had I simply been the acceptable replacement, the vessel for continuing the Miller line? The photo album slipped from my fingers, pages splaying across the attic floor. As I bent to gather them, a phone fell out, an old flip phone I didn't recognize. Curiosity overwhelmed propriety as I clicked it open, surprised to find it still had battery life. Text messages filled the screen. Dozens between Austin and Allison, dated during the first 6 months of our marriage. My stomach clenched as I scrolled, reading messages no wife should ever discover. Miss you, Austin had written 3 weeks after our wedding. Today was unbearable. Another Sunday dinner with Mom watching my every move. Then why stay? Allison had responded. You know I still love you. It's complicated. The business, the house, everything is tied to Mom's approval. And now Kelsey might be pregnant. My finger froze on the screen. That message was dated exactly when I'd first suspected my pregnancy, before I'd even told Austin. How had he known? I scrolled further, the truth revealing itself in sickening fragments. Mom's thrilled about the baby, Austin had written. Says it's the first step in securing the Miller legacy. And Kelsey? Allison had asked. She's just happy I'm happy. The messages continued for months. Austin complaining about marriage, reminiscing about their relationship, even planning a meeting that thankfully never happened when Allison backed out. The final exchange was dated around my 4th month of pregnancy. "I can't do this anymore," Allison had written. "You're married. You're having a baby. Let me move on." "I know," Austin had replied. "Mom says I need to focus on my family now anyway. She's got everything under control." Everything under control. The words echoed in my head as pieces clicked into place. My easy acceptance into the Miller family despite not coming from their kind of people. Jocelyn's immediate attachment to me, so different from her treatment of Allison. The constant reminders of Miller traditions, Miller expectations, Miller control. I hadn't been chosen for love. I'd been selected for compliance. The room spun around me as 7 months of pregnancy hormones collided with the shattered remains of my marriage. Stumbling to my feet, I made my way downstairs to the kitchen, bracing myself against the counter. The baby kicked sharply as if sensing my distress. My phone lay on the counter where I'd left it hours earlier. With trembling fingers I made the first call. "Rachel? It's me." "Yes, I'm okay." I swallowed hard. "Actually no, I'm not okay. Can I come stay with you for a while? Tomorrow morning." My sister didn't ask questions, just gave immediate agreement. "My couch is yours for as long as you need it. Do you want me to come get you?" "No, I'll drive myself. There's something I need to do first." The second call was to my doctor. Not Dr. Myers but Dr. Richardson, whose number I still had saved. "I need a paternity test," I said without preamble when she answered. "One that can be done before birth." "There are risks," she warned. "And it's expensive if insurance doesn't cover it." "I don't care about either. How quickly can it be done?" The third call was to a lawyer whose card Lisa had pressed into my hand months ago, when she'd first noticed my disappearing act. "Just in case," she'd whispered. "I need divorce papers drawn up immediately," I told the answering service. "And I need to know my rights regarding an unborn child if the father isn't actually the father." With each call my voice grew stronger, my resolve clearer. By the time I hung up after the third conversation, the woman who had meekly worn the blue dress that morning was gone. I moved through the house with newfound purpose, gathering only what truly belonged to me. Clothes I'd bought before marriage, books from my teaching days, the few pieces of jewelry from my family. Everything fit into 2 suitcases, a testament to how little of me existed in this house. In the bedroom I carefully removed my wedding ring, placing it on Austin's nightstand. Beside it I left a note with 5 simple words. "The vessel has emptied itself. Let them figure out what had landed on their doorstep in the morning." Dawn broke over the Miller house as I drove away, my 2 suitcases and a small box of mementos tucked in the back seat of my sedan. The GPS was set for Rachel's apartment in Chicago, but I had one stop to make first. The courier service opened at 7 a.m., and I was their first customer, paperwork and package ready. "Guaranteed delivery by 9 a.m.? I confirmed, paying the rush fee without hesitation. "Yes, ma'am." "Someone will need to sign for it," the clerk replied, affixing the necessary labels to my manila envelope. "There will be someone there," I assured him, picturing the Sunday morning scene I was missing. Austin stumbling down for coffee that Jocelyn would have waiting, their peaceful routine unfolding without a thought for the empty space I'd left behind. Meanwhile, across town, that peaceful routine was shattering apart. Jocelyn let herself into her son's house at 8:15 a.m., grocery bags filled with ingredients for her special Sunday breakfast casserole. The baby shower had been a triumph. Everyone commenting on her impeccable planning, her thoughtful touches, the perfect execution. If Kelsey had been a bit quiet toward the end, well, pregnant women were often overwhelmed by emotion. "Austin," she called out, setting the bags on the kitchen counter. "I brought everything for breakfast. And the leftover cake from yesterday." No answer. Frowning, she made her way upstairs. Austin was usually up by now, especially after golfing. The exercise always reset his internal clock. Perhaps Kelsey wasn't feeling well and he was tending to her. The master bedroom door stood ajar. Jocelyn pushed it open without knocking. She never did, not in her son's home. "Austin, are you?" He sat on the edge of the unmade bed, still in yesterday's clothes, staring at something in his hand. At his mother's voice he looked up, face ashen. "She's gone," he said hoarsely. "Kelsey left." Jocelyn moved swiftly to his side, eyes darting around the room. The closet door hung open, revealing gaps where Kelsey's clothes had been. Her dresser drawers were partially pulled out, clearly emptied in haste. What do you mean, gone? Jocelyn demanded, though the evidence was clear enough. Where would she go in her condition? Austin held out his palm, revealing Kelsey's wedding ring and a small note card. Jocelyn snatched both, reading the 5 words with growing indignation. The vessel has emptied itself. She scoffed. What nonsense is this? After everything we've done for her. I don't know, Mom, Austin said, his voice unnaturally flat. I came home late last night and assumed she was asleep. I was out with the guys after the shower. I crashed in the guest room so I wouldn't wake her. I didn't even check on her until just now. Well, call her. She can't have gone far, not 7 months pregnant. Jocelyn began pacing the room, mentally cataloging which of their acquaintances might be harboring her ungrateful daughter-in-law. Austin held up his phone. Straight to voicemail. I've tried 6 times. This is ridiculous, Jocelyn huffed. Pregnancy hormones, obviously. She'll come crawling back once she realizes she can't manage on her own. Remember how helpless she was picking out maternity clothes. The doorbell rang, interrupting her tirade. Austin seemed rooted to the bed, so Jocelyn marched downstairs, composing herself. No need for neighbors to suspect anything amiss in the Miller household. A courier stood on the porch, electronic signature pad extended. Delivery for Austin Miller. Needs a signature. I'll sign for him, Jocelyn said briskly, scrawling her name across the screen. The courier handed over a thick manila envelope and departed with professional indifference, already checking his next delivery on his handheld device. Jocelyn examined the envelope as she walked back upstairs. No return address, just Austin's name typed on a standard label. A sense of foreboding crept up her spine. There's a package for you, she announced, entering the bedroom where Austin remained motionless. Probably those golf club covers you ordered. He took the envelope without interest, turning it over in his hands before finally ripping open the seal. 3 separate documents slid out onto the bedspread. The first was printed on medical letterhead, bold text proclaiming prenatal paternity test results across the top. Austin's eyes widened as he scanned the content, color draining from his face. What is it? Jocelyn demanded, snatching the paper from his trembling hands. She read quickly, her perfectly maintained composure crumbling with each line. Non-paternity confirmed. 0% probability. Conclusive exclusion. The words blurred together as rage built within her chest. She cheated on you, Jocelyn spat, throwing the paper down. That whole innocent act, that yes, Jocelyn, and whatever you think is best routine, all while she was carrying another man's child. Austin sat frozen, staring at nothing. Mechanically, he picked up the second document. Legal papers, pages of dense text with yellow sign here, tabs affixed throughout. Divorce filing already signed by Kelsey Watson Miller, dated yesterday. She planned this, Jocelyn realized aloud, grabbing the papers. The little snake was just waiting for the right moment to humiliate you, to humiliate us. The third document was thinner than the others, headed Voluntary Termination of Parental Rights and Responsibilities. Austin finally found his voice as he skimmed the content. She's waiving any claim to child support or involvement from me, he said, confusion evident in his tone. Why would she do that if she wanted to trap me with another man's baby? To avoid questions, Jocelyn snapped, pacing the room again. To prevent us from demanding a proper investigation. Who knows what else she's been hiding? I never trusted her, not really. Too agreeable, too willing to go along with everything. No backbone. Now we know why. A bitter laugh escaped Austin's throat. You thought she was too agreeable? You've been orchestrating her life since the day we met. I have been preparing her to be a proper Miller wife, Jocelyn corrected sharply. Obviously I failed. She never had the right character for this family. She snatched the final document, scanning it with narrowed eyes. Her outrage faltered momentarily as recognition dawned. The custody waiver was nearly identical to one she herself had drafted early in Kelsey's pregnancy. Just in case you ever decide motherhood isn't for you, she told her daughter-in-law with a thin smile. It had been a test, a way to gauge Kelsey's commitment. The young woman had seemed hurt by the suggestion, but had said nothing as usual. Now those same legal phrases stared back at Jocelyn, twisted into a weapon against her son. We'll fight this, she declared, gathering the papers into a pile. I know excellent lawyers. She can't just walk away pregnant or not. The humiliation alone. Humiliation. Austin repeated, a strange edge to his voice. You're worried about what people will think? Of course. The Miller name means something in this town. Your father built a legacy that I'm now supposed to continue with a proper Miller heir, Austin finished bitterly. Except there is no Miller heir, is there? Just some other man's baby that my wife has been carrying while I've been. He trailed off, face suddenly flushing. While you've been what? Jocelyn demanded. Austin shook his head, reaching for his phone again. Nothing. I need to find her. Talk to her. About what? She's made her choice, Austin. She's discarded you, discarded us. After everything we've done for her. But Austin wasn't listening. He was scrolling through his contacts, stopping at a name Jocelyn couldn't see. His thumb hovered over the screen before he abruptly tossed the phone aside, burying his face in his hands. This is her fault, not yours, Jocelyn insisted, sitting beside him, hand on his back. We'll get through this together just like we always have. Mother and son. Austin lifted his head, eyes red-rimmed but suddenly clear. Do you remember what I said in my toast yesterday? Of course. It was beautiful, acknowledging everything I've done to prepare for this baby. I called her just the vessel, Austin said quietly. Not the mother of my child. Not my wife. Just the vessel. And you smiled. Everyone smiled. Jocelyn waved dismissively. It was a figure of speech. And clearly accurate given what we now know. No. It was the truth. That's how we treated her. How I treated her. Like she didn't matter except for what she could provide. He picked up the paternity test results again, staring at the clinical wording that had shattered his world. Maybe this is exactly what I deserve. The doorbell rang again, interrupting whatever response Jocelyn might have made. Her perfect Sunday morning, her perfect family image, her perfect control, all crumbling with each new development. Whoever stood on that doorstep couldn't possibly bring anything but more chaos to the unraveling Miller legacy. The second doorbell ring brought Jocelyn to her feet, composure fracturing as she marched downstairs. Austin followed slowly, the documents still clutched in his hand. Who else knew? How fast had word spread? But it wasn't a curious neighbor or concerned friend waiting on the porch. It was Jake Sullivan, Kelsey's high school boyfriend, looking uncomfortable in pressed khakis and a button-down shirt. Is Kelsey home? He asked, shifting his weight nervously. She called me this morning, asked me to meet her here. Jocelyn's eyes narrowed dangerously. Did she now? How convenient. Austin stepped forward, recognition dawning as he studied the man before him. Jake had moved back to Henderson about a year ago to take over his father's hardware store. Austin had seen him around town occasionally but never given him much thought. Now, looking at Jake's sandy hair and blue eyes, a sick feeling twisted in his stomach. She's not here, Austin said flatly. But I think you and I need to talk. 30 minutes later, Jake sat at the kitchen table, face ashen as he processed everything Austin had told him. I had no idea, he said, running a hand through his hair. We dated briefly when she first moved back to town before she met you. But we ended things. I never thought. He looked up suddenly. Where is she now? That's none of your concern, Jocelyn interrupted sharply. You've done quite enough already. Jake met her gaze directly, something hardening in his expression. With all due respect, ma'am, if that baby is mine, it's very much my concern. A baby needs a father who's prepared to be one, Austin said quietly, surprising both Jocelyn and Jake. Are you? The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. 2 towns over, I sat in Rachel's apartment, phone pressed to my ear as I listened to Jake's stunned reaction. I never knew, he repeated for the 3rd time. Kelsey, you have to believe me. I do, I assured him, hand resting protectively on my belly. That's why I called you as soon as I found out. You deserve to know. Do you need anything? Money? Help with doctor's bills? His immediate offer of support, so different from Austin's delegated concern, made my throat tight with emotion. Just time, I managed. I'm staying with my sister while I figure things out. Can I see you? Jake asked hesitantly. I'd like to talk in person if that's okay. I agreed to meet him the following weekend at a cafe halfway between our locations. As I hung up, Rachel appeared with 2 cups of tea, settling beside me on her worn couch. "So he took it well?" she asked. "Better than I expected," I admitted. "No accusations, no demands. Just concern. Unlike your in-laws, I'm guessing." Rachel's expression darkened. "Have they tried calling again?" My phone had been buzzing periodically all day. Austin, his mother, even a few church friends undoubtedly recruited for the search. I'd answered only Jake's call. "They'll figure it out eventually," I said. "The paternity test was conclusive. There's nothing to discuss." Rachel studied my face. "Are you really okay? This is a lot to process in one day." Was I okay? My marriage was over. My life had been upended. I was 7 months pregnant with a child whose father was essentially a stranger now. By any rational measure, I should have been falling apart. But underneath the turmoil and uncertainty, a peculiar sense of peace had begun to settle. For the first time in 3 years, I was making my own choices. My own voice was the only one in my head. "I think I will be," I answered honestly. For the first time in a long time. The ripple effect through Henderson was immediate and far-reaching. By Monday morning, Austin couldn't enter his insurance office without feeling eyes tracking his movements. By Tuesday, the whispers had solidified into versions of the story that grew more elaborate with each retelling. Lisa called me that evening, her voice low and concerned. "You wouldn't believe what they're saying at school, Kelsey. Jocelyn's telling everyone you had some kind of breakdown, that you abandoned Austin because of pregnancy hormones." "And what do people believe?" I asked, surprised by how little I cared about the answer. "That's the thing," Lisa said, a smile evident in her voice. "No one's buying it. Mrs. Peterson from the church guild actually told Jocelyn to her face that she'd seen how they treated you at the shower. Said it was unchristian and cruel." More calls followed in the coming days. Barbara from the English department, my dentist, even Austin's cousin Melissa, who confessed she'd always found Jocelyn terrifying. Each conversation revealed another crack in the perfect Miller family image, another person who had seen what I couldn't, that I had been slowly erased. 3 weeks after leaving Henderson, I found a small apartment in Riverside, a charming town about 40 minutes away. Close enough to maintain my doctor's appointments, far enough to build a fresh start. The school superintendent there, upon hearing I was looking for work, offered me a position for the fall semester, contingent on my recovery after the baby arrived. "We need good English teachers," she said matter-of-factly. "Your references are excellent. The rest is just life happening." Jake drove over to help me move in, assembling furniture and hanging curtains with a quiet efficiency. We were awkward around each other at first, our teenage relationship a distant memory, the current circumstances surreal. But as weeks passed, a tentative friendship formed, built on cautious honesty and shared anticipation. "I don't expect anything from you," I told him one evening as we sorted through baby clothes my sister had sent. "You didn't ask for this." "Neither did you," he pointed out, folding a tiny yellow onesie with surprising tenderness. "But I want to be involved, Kelsey. Whatever that looks like." When Sarah Elizabeth Watson arrived on a warm September morning, 2 weeks early and impatient to greet the world, Jake was there in the waiting room. My sister Rachel held my hand through the delivery, her strength anchoring me through each contraction. "She's perfect," the nurse announced, placing my daughter on my chest. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and eyes that, even squinting and new, were unmistakably like her father's. Jake's face when he first held her was a study in wonder and terror. "She's so small," he whispered, carefully supporting her head. "But strong," I assured him, watching as her tiny hand wrapped around his finger. "Like her mother." 6 months later, as spring returned to Ohio, Austin requested a meeting. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in a neutral town, somewhere neither of us was known. I arrived first, settling Sarah into her stroller before ordering a cappuccino. She was growing quickly, babbling happily and reaching for everything in sight. When Austin walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the polished insurance agent in pressed slacks and monogrammed shirts. His hair was longer, his expression more open. Most strikingly, he was alone. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, taking the seat across from me. His eyes lingered on Sarah, taking in her features with a bittersweet smile. "She's beautiful, Kelsey." "Thank you," I replied, surprised by the absence of anger or resentment in my voice. Those emotions had burned themselves out months ago, leaving only a calm clarity. I sold the agency, Austin said abruptly. Moved to Columbus. I'm going back to school. Architecture like I always wanted before. He trailed off, both of us knowing who had redirected that dream. That's wonderful, I said, meaning it. And your mother? A complicated expression crossed his face. We're working on boundaries. Therapy helps. Turns out when your wife leaves and half the town sides with her, it forces some self-reflection. I nodded, watching Sarah as she batted at the toys hanging from her stroller. I'm glad, Austin. Really. I wanted to apologize, he continued, voice lower now. For everything. For calling you what I called you at the shower. For not seeing what was happening. For not being strong enough to break the pattern. I could have spoken up sooner, I acknowledged. But I don't think either of us was ready to hear the truth then. We talked for nearly an hour, the conversation easier than I would have imagined possible. No accusations, no defenses, just two people acknowledging a shared failure and separate paths forward. As he prepared to leave, Austin hesitated. Can I ask you something? That night when you found out about the baby, about Jake, were you devastated? Or relieved? I considered the question carefully. Both, I answered honestly. Devastated that what I thought we had wasn't real. Relieved that I had a reason to leave that would stick. He nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. The vessel emptied itself, he murmured, recalling my note. But really you filled yourself back up. As I watched him walk away, I realized he was right. My revenge hadn't been in the paternity revelation or the public humiliation of the Millers. It hadn't even been in reclaiming my independence. My true liberation had been finding myself again. The woman who had been systematically erased, silenced, and diminished. She had been there all along, waiting for me to remember her strength. Sarah gurgled happily in her stroller, reaching for me with complete trust and love. I lifted her into my arms, breathing in her sweet baby scent. Come on, little one, I whispered. Let's go home. Our life. Our choices. No vessel, just a woman and her daughter, strong enough to shape their own story. If this story of quiet liberation had you rooting for Kelsey, smash that like button right now. My favorite part was when she left her wedding ring with that perfect note. The vessel has emptied itself. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more powerful stories about finding your voice. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.